In this video, we'll be taking a look at async functions. Async functions were added in ES2017. For those of you who are unfamiliar with asynchronous code, essentially what I mean is whenever you need to retrieve data from, let's say, a server, well, that data is going to take a random amount of time to get to you, and so you need a way to tell your code to wait before continuing to execute your program. And so I'll start with a basic example. Whenever you want to use an async function, you need to use the async keyword. And so if I were to, I'm going to have to cancel this out. If I were to run this, you can see that whenever we add the async keyword, this will return a promise. And so what we can do is we can add then this. And there we have hello world. Now, this might not appear useful in itself, but what we can do is we can add another keyword called await into our function, and it'll make a lot more sense. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to want to start off by importing fetch, because in Node it doesn't actually have access to the fetch API, and so we're going to do yarn add node fetch, and then we can import it like so. And so what we're going to want to do now is use the keyword await followed by fetch. And what we're going to do is we're going to request some quotes from the Ron Swanson API. And recall that whenever you're using fetch, I'll print it for the heck of it. Let's quote. Whenever we use fetch, it will return a response object like so. And the only way to get access to the JSON that we want is to, let's call this response. We're going to have to execute the JSON method. And so if I run this again, you can see that we now have our quote. And so if I were to add another console.log, essentially what's going to happen is it's going to make its request to the server. It's going to wait until the promise resolves, and then it's going to continue to execute the code. And so it's going to reach this statement. Because of the await, it's going to wait for the promise to resolve, because this returns a promise. The reason being, if you have requested a very large body of data, it might take some time for you to convert that into JSON. And so if I were to run that, you can see that it waited for the promise to resolve, then it printed this, and then it printed that. Now, we're making an assumption here in that the promises are resolving successfully, but this isn't always in the case. For example, if I were to just remove an S here and run the same thing, we would get an error. Dealing with fetch the old way, we had a different way of dealing with this. Whenever we're using the keyword await, JavaScript will throw an error whenever the promise fails to resolve. And so what we can do is we can actually just wrap this in a try catch. And now you can see that we got our error message right there. Suppose the scenario in which we wanted to request multiple quotes. Like so, and if I run this, oh, I forgot to change this. If I were to run this, we would get both. Now the problem with this approach is that it will make this HTTP request, and then it'll wait for the promise to resolve before making this HTTP request. And if each HTTP request takes a couple of seconds to resolve, well then you can see how this slows down our code substantially. And so in the cases where you need to make multiple HTTP requests, what you'll want to do is we'll want to use promise all. And so I will remove this. Sure. And the way promise.all works is that you give it a list of promises, like so, and what it'll do is it'll make this HTTP request and then immediately make this HTTP request, and it'll wait for all of them to resolve before continuing with the code execution. Now again, because the way fetch works, this will return a response object, which is not what we want. And so what we'll do is we'll add a then. And then the same over here. And this will work because this statement right here will return a promise as well. And so executing this, you can see that we get both quotes. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments.